Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and welcome to our program, Creating Options for Seniors, Structuring Affordable Assisted Living Transactions. My name is Courtney Battle, and I'm the Membership Director for HAND. And I'm so excited to be here with you this morning. We want to thank you for joining us. We have a really great program lined up for you today that I'm confident will be very informative. But before we get started, I wanted to just flag a few housekeeping items. First, as many of you know, on June 25th, HAND will be hosting its annual meeting and housing expo. So if you have not registered, I encourage you to do so. You can head over to our website to learn more about this year's theme and the agenda that we have lined up. We're very excited about this year's convening. So I encourage you to register as soon as possible. June 25th is upon us. And also, next week, we'll be holding a convening that will continue our conversation on DC's building energy performance standards. Many of you may recall that we've been hosting these for the last couple of years. And so if you're a developer, property owner, or manager, I encourage you to join us next week. That information can be found on our website as well. And we hope to see you there on June 10th. Last but not least, I'd like to thank our sponsor for today's program, Reno and Kavanaugh, for their continued thought leadership and partnership, as well as our speakers who have so generously lent their time and talents to this very important topic. And so we truly appreciate all of you and thank you again for your participation. With that, I will turn things over to our first speaker. Jeff Blackwell is the Vice President of Real Estate Development at Victory Housing. He's going to provide some really important context to frame our conversation for today. And so, Jeff, the floor is yours.
Okay, can you see me? Technology here. I just wanted to make sure I did it. Yes, as Courtney said, I'm Jeff Blackwell. I'm Vice President of Real Estate Development with Victory Housing. We're a nonprofit developer. We're the nonprofit development arm of the Archdiocese of Washington, and we operate in Montgomery, PG, DC, and the southern counties of Maryland, primarily developing affordable housing for seniors. Of our 32 properties, most of them are for independent living, but we do operate 6 assisted living projects in the metro area in Maryland, but we don't currently do anything in DC. So this is going to be an interesting presentation, I'm sure, for everyone. I think most of what I'll talk about, and I'll run through some statistics that everybody can read from the presentation, but I think pretty much this is straightforward in terms of the need. I think obviously we all know from what we do that the affordable housing need is there, but it's almost a no-brainer. And thus it follows that assisted living would be, follow within the same vent as that. So anyways, to start out, do you want to go to my first slide, Gianna? Okay, you can flip past that. Next slide. Okay, and as I said, we own and we also privately manage our 6 assisted living communities in Montgomery and PG County. Those are at level 2 care, which means that there's medication assistance, dining is included, as well as assistance with housekeeping. Okay, next slide. Okay, everybody is aware the senior 65 and up are just, it's only growing, and based on baby boomers and the rest of the population, by 2030, it's going to be really impactful in terms of what the need is going to be. And we know this too, just from managing our independent living projects, that the need is there. We have a lot of people who are aging in place and continue to offer more and more resident services to the best ability until folks need to move that either can't handle their activities of daily living or are at a point health-wise that just have to move. As it says here, currently 1 million Americans live in some type of senior living community that's expected to double by 2030. And there are more, an estimated 70% of people currently turning age 65 will require some type of long-term long-term care in their lifetime. And we see this too, not just 65 and older. The average age of folks in our independent living is actually 75. So it's obvious that, that's going to only increase, and we see the life expectancy and more people coming to our assisted living as well as independent living, and waiting lists and things like that. So it's definitely coming. There's already quite a bit of folks living in assisted living communities, and most are 85 and older. Like I said, our average is about 85, so that's pretty much in keeping with that. And I can skip the last one since I went over that. Can you go to the next one? Okay. Oh, it didn't come out. All right, well, that doesn't look good. It's estimated that the average length of stay, can you go back? Yeah, it's just so you can stay there. It's estimated assisted living's resident average length of stay is around 22 months. We typically find that that's a little bit less than that. So we do have a lot of turnover at our projects, either due to needing to go on to further nursing, or just the fact that they have passed on. Particularly with COVID, we've had some deaths more than previously, and the occupancy has dropped a little bit, but still with the amount of waiting list folks, we've still been able to stay fairly occupied. In the DMV, the average assisted living rate is over $11,000 a month. And this doesn't include the medication and medical care that are needed for these folks. So as you can imagine, projects like we're going to talk about today are extremely important. Our projects are very low in terms of, and I'll show this on the next slide, in terms of incomes. And basically we get to that by doing a percentage of the project affordable, but also needing to do quite a few market rate to cross-subsidize within the project. With the aging baby boom, the contingent of middle-income seniors is set to be 14.4 million by 2029. And most of them won't be able to pay for assisted living. So that's just further emblematic of the problem that we're having. And we're also, even though we've all known for quite a time that there's this problem coming with baby boomers and seniors, we're still lacking affordable housing for seniors, both in the independent and assisted living. And so it's really playing catch up and trying to get there. And so that's some of why with us, we've been looking at some other potential projects for assisted living and going from there. I won't spend a lot of time on the next couple slides. This is basically, you can slip to the next slide, Gianna. This is just a unit count. And this is just to highlight that basically our projects are typically smaller. Smaller than what we're going to talk about today. We're typically in the 35 unit range because we like to keep it as a very home-like atmosphere. However, I think the economies of scale are pushing us further and further to having to go to potentially larger facilities and communities that can help more folks as well. And as you can see here, the total number of affordable units is about 54%. And our occupancy consistently stays, actually it's closer to 99%, but that's only not 100% just because of turnover. Next page. This is just an example of some of the rates at our assisted living facilities. And this again is in comparison to the Metro DC amount of 11,288 a month. Basically, there's a 3 to 4% annual rate of increase. And a lot of this is due to obvious just costs related to the service side in particular. It's just a very expensive undertaking to do all of this. And basically in our case, most of this straight financing has been straightforward. So, we've kept it so that there's not additional compliance and regulatory burden to the maximum amount that we can. However, we understand, in using newer tools like low-income housing tax credits and such, are going to be something that's going to be in our future. And that's all I have. Thank you. Oh, and I'll turn it over to Matt Greason. I'm sorry, Matt.
Thanks, Jeff, and thank you for setting the stage
Yeah.
for this presentation today. We appreciate it. My name is Matt Greason. I'm a partner at Reno and Kavanaugh in Washington, D.C. And we work with affordable housing developers. We're legal counsel to affordable housing developers in the district, in the region, and nationally. I think what Jeff's presentation told us is that there's a tremendous need, not just for senior housing and not just for affordable housing and not just for assisted living, but a combination of the three. And so what we're going to talk about today is the sort of how you put together these, very complicated deals that bring together a lot of different funding sources to make these projects possible for low-income seniors and extremely and very low-income seniors to live in an assisted living community. And then we're also going to have the opportunity, after I kind of set the stage on what these projects look like, to hear from two folks whose organizations have recently closed construction financing for those projects, and they can tell us a little bit about their case studies and how they put those together. And so I will first, I think, go to my slides, and then I'll afterwards we'll transition over to the case study portion of the presentation today. So as I said, Reno and Kavanaugh is a firm with offices in Washington, D.C., Columbia, Maryland, and Nashville, Tennessee, and we have a national affordable housing and community development practice. I focus a lot of my practice on the representation of developers in the DMV, where we, help develop projects, particularly complicated mixed-use, complex finance projects with a lot of different sources and inputs, and a lot of these projects, are like this one, where it provides a tremendous product for the resident. We have, in the last couple of years, had the opportunity to work on a number of these affordable assisted living projects in the district. There's I believe it's, well, it was until recently 3 under construction in the district, and we had worked on all 3. The first project is actually just entering lease up, which is really exciting for the residents of the district and the surrounding jurisdictions. And the second 2 projects are you'll hear from both of those groups. Urban Atlantic and their partners have developed or are under construction on a affordable assisted living project at their Walter Reed master development. And the folks at Greg Cardona are under construction on their Kenilworth affordable assisted living project. And so that's all very exciting. And they're certainly not easy projects to get to closing, but I think they're very fulfilling once they're leasing up. If we could go to the next slide, please. So I want to talk generally about, and I think the folks who are in the audience today probably know affordable housing pretty well, know the sort of the sources of funds, the tax credits, the government loans and grants that are available. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the assisted living programs and set the stage kind of for what those sort of subsidies and available sources are to help make these projects available and to make them possible. I'm going to talk about a little bit about, and I do want to say, kind of as I'm going through here, right? I mean, I'm giving sort of affordable assisted living 101, and there's a lot more in the background of all of this, and there's a lot of considerations and issues that come up, and so and every project is different. So I'm going to kind of give the basics and set the stage, and obviously once you sort of start underwriting a project, you find unique issues for every project, and there's a lot more going on, but I want to make sure everyone has the basics. So we'll talk a little bit about flow of funds and sort of which funds come in and what they pay for, and how you make these projects possible. And then we'll talk about, it says structuring issues, but it's more than that. It's sort of unique considerations for these projects, and how you might address them. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So there are a number of inputs that help subsidize these projects, and this is true, right? If whether it's a affordable project or not, but it's sort of the interplay between the LIHTC and these subsidy programs that makes these projects challenging. The first set of inputs that come in are funds that are available to folks who are elderly or disabled or blind and are of low income. And these funds are, of course, available to, the SSI is available to all people who fit that category. But in this instance, it can help them pay for their assisted living residents. And so SSI is a federal program that's available, as I said, for low-income, elderly, disabled, and blind folks. It's administered by the Federal Social Security Administration, but it's also, it flows through, district offices and state offices in each jurisdiction. It is generally paid directly to individuals, although in the context of an affordable assisted living project, there are ways for the individuals to opt for that income to be paid directly to the project. And so one of the first issues related to these assisted living programs is that there are funds that will pay for certain portions of the costs of the operation of the project, but not others. And so, for example, these funds pay for room and board, which means rent, meals, things like that. Whereas you'll hear in a little bit that there are other funds that will only pay for typical assisted living services. So medication assistance, daily living assistance, the sort of the things that makes these projects staff heavy and helpful to people who need assistance in their daily lives. And so you have to think about, as you're underwriting them, which funds are going to pay for which of the needs of the project. And so the SSI helps you pay for the room and board aspects of the project. In addition, there's an OSP program, which is a state supplement to Social Security benefits. This number varies by state. In the district, it's a good amount. It accompanies the SSI and it supplements it and makes it all the more possible to pay for these, as Jeff pointed out, generally very expensive to operate projects. And so it helps subsidize these individuals, these tenants, costs of room and board and things like that that are quite expensive. And so like SSI, they're paid directly to individuals who meet the SSI requirements. Again, that varies by state, and there may be ways in certain jurisdictions to allow for those individuals to opt for the funds to be paid directly to the project to meet their obligations. Could we go to the next slide, please? The next program I want to talk about is how you pay for the services themselves. This is the Medicaid waiver program. It's commonly referred to as the EPD program, the Elderly Persons with Disabilities program. And this is the bulk of the funding that allows you to provide those ancillary services, those sort of staff heavy assisted living programming services that are really the kind of the crux of what these facilities provide. And these funds are also authorized by the Social Security Act, but there are waiver programs created by the states, right? Waivers of certain regulations that allow them to pay directly to these facilities. And these allow elderly and disabled peoples to stay in assisted living residences rather than institutional facilities. And so it improves their quality of life because these projects, these affordable assisted living projects, are so high quality that it allows them to live in these types of facilities. As I mentioned earlier, these ALR benefits cover social and health services, but cannot be used for room and board. So, you have to be careful about your flow of funds and making sure that you're clear what's going to pay for what. And these benefits are paid directly to the assisted living residence provider, although that can vary from state to state. Next slide, please. And so this is a slide that kind of sets forth the general requirements and benefits, right, for these assisted living programs. As you can see in each instance, right, that the folks need to be 65 or older or blind or disabled. And then there are, in each case, income and resource restrictions that you have to think about, right, that are an additional part of your lease-up program, and it makes it important that you, you know, when you're thinking about who your property management will be, you have to get someone who has not only experience with the LIHTC program and the other sort of funding sources that are typical to affordable housing, but you also have to think about making sure that you meet all of the requirements of the SSI, OSP, and the waiver program or the EPD program. You know, generally speaking, right, it's you can either have one or more property managers. You can have someone who has LIHTC experience, and you can have someone who has the assisted living program experience, although you can sometimes find property managers that have both. You know, people who develop assisted living, or I'm sorry, affordable housing projects are used to the typical, you know, tax tenant income certifications and other sort of hurdles you have to go through, right, on the lease up of the affordable housing programs. And that's doubly so in assisted living projects, right, where you have to think a lot about licensure issues, which are making sure that you get your EPD license and that you are you properly qualified to receive those funds as an EPD qualifying facility. And so that's, again, a situation in which you want to put a lot of time into thinking about who your manager will be. Because unlike your typical affordable housing program, where you may not have any employees of the facility, right, those will all be the property manager employees, there will be employees at affordable assisted living programs, and you have to think a lot about who's gonna hold the license, who's gonna employ those employees, who's gonna own any vehicles, right? These are all things that go into the structuring of the project that I will talk about here on the next slide. So if we can go to that. So this slide goes both to flow of funds, the very basics, and the sort of the structure that you will need to undertake, right, to make this project work. It is typical, as I said, right, that in an affordable housing project, the owner will not have any employees, right? But unfortunately, in the EPD context, right, the assisted living context, you do need to have employees, and you do need to have a license, and you have to meet certain qualifications and have someone providing those services who has sufficient experience. You may own vehicles. It's a much more sort of staff-heavy type project, and so what is typical is that you will have a separate provider entity with a provider agreement with the LIHTC owner, who holds that EPD license, the Medicaid waiver license, the ALR license that allows you to operate as an assisted living facility, and that entity will employ the employees and own vehicles, hold a license, things like that. And as a result, that entity will receive the EPD waiver funds for the supportive services at the project. And then you have an agreement between you and the LIHTC owner and that provider entity. And there's a lot of different ways you can structure that relationship, but that will sort of govern the relationship between the assisted living side of the house and the LIHTC issues. And then, you know, the rent for room and board is paid by the tenant, and it can be paid from, if they have outside income, it's paid from that, or if they qualify for the SSI and OSP programs, they pay your rent and other sort of meals and room and board items out of those funds directly to the project owner. If we could go to the next slide, please. You know, the final things I want to note is, you know, there are a lot of regulatory issues on the on these projects. You have to really get a good relationship with the the offices in your state or jurisdiction that administer these programs in DC Health and DC Healthcare Finance are key in the sort of assisted living licensure programs, and then making sure that there's the flow of funds to your project from those federal and state sources. So you really want to dig into what their unique requirements are and make sure you're aware of what you're going to need to do to get your license and get funds flowing when you get to lease up. As I said, room and board, rent, and 3 meals a day cannot be used for the EPD waiver funds, and so those need to come from other sources. And so you need to make sure that in your lease documents that you're being clear about which funds are paying for which expenses, and you can do that in your lease and your other management documents. And you'll of course have your ancillary services agreement, which will obligate the tenant to pay for services. One important tax credit item that I wanted to highlight is that for the purposes of tax credits, you have to make sure that those services are optional. It's a requirement in order to make sure that that does not count as tenant income, right? For the purposes of your tax credit compliance. I think it's typical though that in these instances, if someone is trying to move into one of these projects, right, they're going to want those services, and so I think that folks find that everyone opts into those optional services. And then finally, something I mentioned before, right, rental payments for SSI and OSP. Those funds could go directly to the tenants, and you need to make sure that you're working with the appropriate state and local offices to make sure that you're able to secure those funds for your services, and so that you can fund your project appropriately. Next slide, which I think may be my last one. So I've tried to sort of highlight some of the key issues that arise from the sort of the 2 key funding areas that make these assisted living projects unique, and how they interplay with your typical LIHTC project. I think we may have at least one question. Do we want to address that now, or?
Yes, feel free to address that.
Let's see, what is the?
Actually, a second that just came in the chat. The first is, what is an LPD license?
Okay, I think the question is I was probably not saying it clearly enough. I was saying EPD license, but really what you need to make sure you have is your assisted living residence license, which is, you need to qualify as an assisted living residence with DC Health and DC Healthcare Finance in order to provide those services and then receive the appropriate subsidy. And so you have to make sure, there's quite a lot that goes into assisted living compliance, right? There's inspections, there's things to think about in design and construction. Folks need to approve the layout and the amenities of your project, and there's quite a bit that goes into the assisted living licensure, whether it's an affordable project or otherwise. And so if you're someone who's new to these programs, you may want to make sure you're working with appropriate consultants and architects who have the experience, right, to make sure that these projects qualify, and you'll be able to get your assisted living license at the appropriate time in order to receive the funds.
Okay, and it looks like the next question is, how are ALR HCBS funds secured?
Well, I think the basic answer is, if you are in a qualified assisted living residence and you have tenants who qualify for the appropriate programs, you can apply for, right, if you're meeting all of the requirements, and receive the funds on a monthly basis. So it's not like it's a competitive solicitation or like tax credits. It's sort of done through the existing regulatory programs to once you have a residence. And then I see one other question here, which was that Section 32 does not allow tax credits to be used for assisted living. No, I think that that's sort of what we've been going into here. Section 42, actually, I think it's a section 142, a bond requirement. You can't use tax credits for skilled nursing or medical facilities, and none of what happens in these projects is considered skilled nursing. That's a technical distinction under the applicable rules, right? And so you can't have medical assisted giving, but you can have day-to-day assisted living services provided, which are a distinction. And then there's another question on how LIHTC, if it's correct that LIHTC helps fund the brick and mortar and the Medicaid waiver helps cover the operating costs. And that's generally true, right? And so, right, you would have a typical capital stack, right, for a LIHTC program. For the residents, right, you have your tax credit equity, your bonds or conventional construction financing, and then your permanent financing, right, and that builds the building, and then the Medicaid waiver, the SSI, and the OSP in part, help cover the operating costs associated with resident services and care, and so generally speaking, because of the significant nature of those EPD funds, they are adequate to cover the full service cost. And it kind of varies from project to project, right? I mean, you have to kind of get into underwriting and make sure that you're able to do that, but it is a significant funding source. I think that's all the questions.
Yep, that was
so. Okay, and so I next want to turn the microphone over to Chris Vernick, who is a development manager at Urban Atlantic, and they are under construction on their affordable assisted living project on the Walter Reed campus.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Matt, for the intro, and thanks to the HAND team for inviting me to present this morning. I think we're good to start with the slides. As Matt mentioned, we're currently under construction with a affordable assisted living project called 14 North. And I think we as a company are extremely excited. It's really addressing a lot of that need that Jeff was kind of digging into, and using a lot of the structures that Matt just kind of introduced, and then some. So as I mentioned, it's 54 units of senior affordable assisted living. All 54 units are 30% AMI or lower. And, some of the layers, which I'll dig into in a little bit, we do have low-income housing tax credit allocation, 9% for the project, DHCD Housing Production Trust Funds, and then also we have the Local Rent Supplement Program, LRSP, for all 54 of the units, which means that all 54 units will be residents will come through DHS's coordinated entry process, and then also, as discussed, kind of on the assisted living services side, that will be covered by the EPD waiver program that Matt just went through. So before I kind of dig into some more on the structure and layering of the project, I'm just going to step back and run through a little bit of background on Urban Atlantic and our experience with senior affordable and now digging into assisted living, and then go a little bit into the Walter Reed Master Plan redevelopment, which is where the 14 North project is located, and the building it's located in is actually in itself a very complicated structure. And so we'll kind of dig into that, and then we'll get back into a little bit of the different layers and structures that we're using for the project. Next slide, please. Great. So Urban Atlantic was founded in 1998 and has really kind of focused and created a specialty in developing large urban infill, mixed use, and mixed income communities. And that focus on kind of large master plan redevelopment has really enabled us to achieve a lot of volume. And we have almost $2 billion in development and acquisitions since our founding. And kind of accompanying that has been a long-term commitment to senior affordable housing. And as of today, around 1,500 units produced and maintained. And specifically within the district right now, we have 5 seniors projects totaling roughly 400 units. And I think that long commitment to seniors projects and also, you know, using different mechanisms to, you know, get those projects done, including, you know, low-income housing tax credits, both 4% and 9% deals, tax-exempt bonds, HPTF funds, experience with that, you know, DCHA and the LRSP programs has kind of set the stage for us to be ready to execute on a deal like 14 North, which kind of combines all those pieces and then some. And then kind of on a separate business line for Urban Atlantic, we also have done $3 billion of projects through a new markets tax credits allocations, EB-5 financing, and then some OpZone investment platforms as well. Next slide. So kind of honing in on one of our current master plan developments and where 14 North is, the Parks at Walter Reed. It's located in Northwest, and we're partnered with the District of Columbia and also on the master plan development with Hines and Trident Development. And at a broad level, we're looking at 66 acres of redevelopment. That's a mixture of renovation of existing buildings and ground up. The total kind of completed square footage is going to be around 3.1 million. And we've got some renders over there to the right. Next slide. And so kind of the general breakdown is up there. I won't run through the numbers, but I think you can see it's your typical master plan, a broad mix of uses, a lot of retail and creative and nonprofit space. In general, the site, as you can see, we're bounded on the west by Rock Creek Park and 16th Street. On the east, it's Georgia, and then Fern Street to the north and Aspen to the south. That's kind of on the left is your sort of historical aerial view. To the right is what the master plan blocking of the completed project, and outlined in red is really building 14 on both those images, which is on Main Drive, which is sort of the curving road that cuts across the site. And next slide. So just some overall renderings. I think folks who have driven up Georgia past the site in probably the past 6 months have seen a ton of activity going on, which is really exciting. So the streetscape is evolving, and we're really excited about what's happening on Building 14 and also throughout the site. So just some renders to give you an idea of, you know, the look and feel of what the overall project's going to look like. And I think a really important key and component both for the seniors and all the residents of the site is the massive amount of green space. So we're anticipating, well, there will be roughly a third of the campus of that 66 acres is going to remain permanently as green space. So a lot of green area considering you're right in the district. Next slide. So honing in on Building 14, which is in of itself a very complex structure. I started talking about 14 North, but 14 North is just one of 4 pieces of Building 14, also known as Abrams Hall. This was an existing Army barracks constructed in 1976. Every single unit was an efficiency, and there was some limited office space in the building as well. And as a part of the master plan redevelopment, the building was essentially carved into 4 different pieces. The southern portion, which was completed at the end of 2019, is owned by Help USA, and they led the redevelopment of that portion, and that houses 77 units of formerly homeless veterans. Building 14 Middle, which is really just the middle portion and the largest section of the building, was a joint venture with Urban, the not-for-profit Housing Up, Hines, and 1750K Affordable Partners. And we finished that project also at the end of 2019, and that is 80 units of senior affordable housing, 50% AMI or lower. And also in that, of those 80, we have 16 units that are 30% AMI or lower, as in addition to that. And then really an important component that I think, Matt started talking about, identifying partners that really can help to navigate the complexity of the various layers of the subsidy programs, et cetera. And to that end, starting with 14 Middle, Urban Atlantic has been partnering with Housing Up, who actually have their corporate offices located in the 14 Middle building. And they've been really a key partner in helping us work through, the lease-up process and a lot of the dynamics of the different subsidy sources. And I'll get a little bit into that in the next slide. And then finally, we come to 14 North, which is the kind of the smallest portion of the building. It's roughly 33,000 square feet there on the northern side, outlined in red. And that is going to be, as I mentioned, 54 units, all efficiency studio units. And we are currently under construction with Hamel Builders on that and anticipating completion early next year. So I think we can go to the next slide and sort of start to dig into the structure piece that Matt kind of outlined the basics on. And one of the huge components that I mentioned, Urban Atlantic had not previously done assisted living. We have a lot of experience in senior and senior affordable, in primarily independent senior. And so it was really important for us to find an AL operator that was, familiar with the EPD waiver program and really, willing to roll up their sleeves and dig into the different layers of subsidies, the OSP and SSI, et cetera, and really make sure that, they'd be an active partner in making sure that everything works as we had envisioned it would. And it was actually Housing Up who connected us with Grand Senior Living, who are a very small assisted living operator out of Vermont, who have really a wealth of experience in working with state-specific Medicaid waiver programs. And it really turned into a natural fit for this really unique project that we were looking to do. And the relationship between all of us has really been fantastic and really was key in working with DHCD, our construction lender, and our LIHTC equity to get everybody to closing, really, and to get the transaction done. So moving on to a little bit of the layering and the subsidy programs, I mentioned them briefly earlier. On the development side of things, from DHCD, we have the 9% low-income housing tax credit allocation. We have, in addition to that, Housing Production Trust Fund soft money. And then in addition, as a part of all that, we are, the usual requirements to apply for other source, kind of secondary sources as well, DCSEU and others. One of the biggest challenges was on the operating side and combining. You've got the EPD waiver program, the LRSP, and all referrals flowing through the coordinated entry system, and coordinating and putting together all the logistics for that was extremely time intensive and really required a lot of coordination. So I'll dig into that in a little bit. On the Medicaid EPD waiver, I think one comment there is up until 2017, the Medicaid EPD waiver reimbursement amount really was not sufficient to cover the cost of providing live-in, assisted living services. And so in 2017, the district adjusted the reimbursement amount, and that adjustment was really kind of a kernel of the idea that for the 14 North project, that we can combine all these programs and serve folks coming in from the coordinated entry system. And, for folks who aren't familiar, 30% AMI or lower, but typically these are folks who are either in shelters, are currently homeless or have experienced incidents of homelessness in the recent past. So we're really filling a gap for folks who had no way you saw, what the cost of assisted living services are. And these are folks who, are the most vulnerable in society. And so this is really fantastic and exciting that we're able to kind of weave all of these components together to provide housing and assisted living services to these folks. And then also on the room and board side, as Matt mentioned, we anticipate SSI and OSP or OSSP, depending on how folks put that acronym together. I think we can go to the next slide. Great. So I think digging into the layering and the challenge to complete the transaction with all of the different parties involved and all of the different layers, I think at a base level, it's similar to what it takes to get, a development deal done, which is that the partners need to have confidence in the underwriting, and primarily for us, the due diligence was through, demonstrating how we were going to lease up the building with all the different layers, the LRSP, the low-income housing tax credits, the EPD waiver program, how we were going to fill the building, stabilize, and then, operate long-term through compliance. And so that process, the first bullet there kind of shows our LIHTC award was in January of 19, and we just closed a few months ago in March on the transaction. And of course, we definitely got hit by COVID like everyone else did, and, you know, caused some challenges in the market, both on the equity and construction lending side of things. But I think the primary driver, or, you know, one of the key drivers, was just the complexity of the deal and the number of different district agencies that were involved with the project. And it really was a tremendous effort across the board from those folks: Department of Housing and Community Development, DHS, DCHA, everybody that's listed out there. You know, we were really working through weekly and monthly calls with everyone on the line, committed to trying to make the project work and, you know, understand how each individual process could work together so that at the end of the day, we would have a financeable and, you know, financially viable project. And kind of, as I mentioned earlier, a key sort of partner in bringing that all together has been our partner, Housing Up. And, you know, we're excited they will also be the permanent supportive housing provider, providing the case management services for all 54 folks in the building once we're leased up. And it's really a natural fit. They have their offices in the building, and, you know, have been a great partner to work through what is, you know, an extremely difficult sort of lease up protocol. And then I just noted our LIHTC equity on the project was R4. Construction lender was Cedar Rapids Bank and Trust. And so I think what I kind of walked through just now is really the process of how we can kind of work through with the district agencies to make sure that all their different processes could align, and demonstrating that in documentation to R4 and CRBT was kind of essential to get them to the finish line. And the second component of that is definitely the legal side and a lot of sort of the documentation and components that Matt sort of ran through at the high level, but kind of tailored to the specifics of our project. And I think took, you know, and it was an incredible amount of due diligence, both from R4 to work through the details of the project. But, you know, we're really excited to be under construction now, and we anticipate having our first residents moving in probably the second half of next year. And, you know, really excited to serve those folks. And I think that completes my comments, and I will pass it over to Usama.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Chris, Matt, the hand team, for the invitation. My name is Usama Swati. I'm one of the partners at Gracardone Partners. We are a multifamily developer by trade. My background started in architecture in the early parts of the 2000s, where slowly made my way into the real estate side, but our greatest focus is community investment and projects with impact. I think this is coming in on the tail end of such great, robust information and presentation. Luckily for the attendees, I've got 4 quick slides. I want to touch on some more high level components of our portfolio. As Matt mentioned, we did close our first transaction into residences at Kenilworth Park in Ward 7 of District of Columbia last year, late summer, and we're under construction and scheduled to deliver that in the summer of 22. Triana, if you were able to pull up my slides, yeah, these will be fairly quick. For some reason, they're not translating all that well, but I think Jeff Blackwell touched on this very quickly. I want to focus in on why we're doing this. Why did we get into the affordable assisted living space and the village that it takes to bring this together? On this slide, what you're seeing is essentially just the what we call the continuum of care. Essentially for seniors, as the Silva tsunami, as the baby boomer generation, there's no shortage of terminology to describe it. The bottom line is post two recessions, the need for aging seniors to be able to receive adequate services and age in place are key. And the two components there, obviously for the healthier seniors that are able to take care of their own ADLs, there's a decent supply. I can't say that the crisis is not broad-based. There's a decent supply of independent living. There's also a very robust home care network, specifically in the District of Columbia and the neighboring jurisdictions. And then I'll skip over to nursing care, specifically post-pandemic. You've seen a critical shortage in nursing beds. And that's really a two-part component, the two-part reason to it. One, just natural demand for folks that have aged and require nursing level care, but also there is the void that I skipped over of assisted living. Prior to Chris's project getting under planning, as well as our project and one other project that's in the district today that's about to actually open up, as Matt mentioned, in Southern Avenue, there was literally 0 dedicated affordable assisted living communities to DC residents. 0. There were several beds, about 2 or 3 dozen that would serve seniors and that were in assisted living, and for one reason or another weren't able to pay, and then the waiver came in to help keep them in place. But the main thing that I want to focus on here is the notion that aging in place is not just a physical space, but it's also a cognitive and a community-based. You hear a lot the HCBS home and community-based services. The goal here is to try to build communities, not just the brick and mortar facilities. You've got to plug into an ecosystem and help support the development of that ecosystem that provides not only the housing, but the services to enable folks to not be transplanted in the latter part of their life from one corner of the city to another place where they've known they know nobody, and their social network is thus fragmented. So our major focus has been on where the need is greatest today, based on data in Ward 7 and 8. Our first project naturally started in Ward 7. We have a few in the planning, but that's really the crux of what the need is and what our targets are. Tran, if you can go to the next slide. I've already touched on this a little bit. I won't read them all to you, but the point that I'll drive home is this crisis, this issue will not be solved at a local level. It will not be solved by developers or operators or service providers alone. It really is going to take a village. It takes a village to raise a child, and I think it takes just as big of a village, if not a bigger village, to take care of our seniors. And for me, this is personal. I mean, I do have elderly parents at this point that are going through the phases of aging, and watching how care provision is really a full-time endeavor, and the costs are astounding. So this is going to be a federal, state, and local endeavor that everybody has to pitch in to figure out how to bring this to fruition. Next slide. Again, the main thing that I'm going to drive here is, and actually, if you can skip to the next one, that's the one I'll wrap with. I think that's my last slide. The communities that we've designed at this point, I think Jeff touched on it earlier in terms of economies of scale. We focus very, very heavily on making sure that the financial feasibility did not take away from the home and community-based feel, meaning this cannot feel institutional. It has to be residential, where folks are able to have their own individual units. But the critical thing is that they have social engagement. So our first project and the model that we've developed essentially consists of studios and 1-bedrooms with kitchenettes and private baths, fully accessible, with obviously the ability to provide housekeeping assistance and assistance with daily activities of living, medication administration, a full health plan. The most exciting part for me from the real estate side is these are communities that are be providing not only the housing, but three fresh meals a day in a dining room environment where folks are able to socialize, consume healthy meals. Whereas specifically through this pandemic, in working with communities in Ward 7 and 8, we've found that the gap grew downright to just food shortages and food insecurity, which is real. So being able to meet those needs while supplementing and providing the platform for which folks can actually socialize, which is the basis of keeping the cognitive standing in a good place and prevent a further deterioration of their health standing, which from a fiscal and a cost perspective to the states and the federal authorities, it's not only the right thing to do for seniors, but it's also the right fiscal thing to do if folks are able to be provided with a space where they in place and cognitively stay engaged. That means that they're going to stay out of a nursing home or delay their transition into a nursing home, and potentially avoid multiple trips to the ER, maintain their medication assistance so that folks are taking their medication on time. Folks with diabetes, they're taking their insulin. Those basic things, avoiding as simple as a urinary tract infection. And the last thing I'll say on that is the edge of this isn't just providing meals and a surface package. I think that the next level of this is figuring out how to bring that ecosystem and also focus on two other components. One being the workforce to provide services for seniors. It's a heavy endeavor. And it's going to take, again, a global approach to developing a workforce, a professional workforce that has the passion for this and is really well compensated, but is dedicated to this sector of the services economy that we're in. The second component is technology, and that technology is really the frontier for how do we pull together the different stakeholders, whether it be the geriatric folks, whether it be the health providers that are offsite, because again, this is not a medical facility, it's a residential community that supports provision of certain health services. So the simple things of sensor packages, ensuring that folks are kept out of ERs by simply being able to to monitor simple visits to the bathroom. I mean, so there's some very novel things. There's also a way to integrate personal records and being able to give real-time data to those service providers. Again, I'm super humbled to have been asked to be joined today. Matt and folks at hand, we look forward to any questions, and that wraps up my piece.
Thank you, Osama. We did get a number of questions in the chat and in the Q&A. So let me throw a couple of these to Chris, which look like they're specific to his project. And Chris, there was a question about the district's rental subsidy program, the LRSP, effectively reducing tenant rents from 50 to 60% of AMI to 30% of AMI. And then a related question that came in the Q&A about the coordinated entry system. Do you want to talk a little bit about sort of the income restrictions at the project and then also your experience with the LESEP protocol and working with your district partners?
Yeah, sure thing. So Tamara, to your question, so I mean the 30% AMI restriction is a true 30% AMI, and we anticipate that all the folks, all 54 units are going to get filled through the coordinated entry system. So I'm not sure I'm 100% following, but those folks will, they will be truly, making under the 30% AMI for the district.
And you get, Chris, right? that restriction comes from a couple of places for you. One, it's that all of your units are PSH units, and then also that you have your district disposition requirements, right?
And I'm just opening up the Q&A.
I think that
Okay.
the question
Yeah.
was, what
So
did you
Chris.
learn? Yeah.
So you know, I mentioned there the 14 middle project, which has you know 12 units that referrals were provided through the coordinated entry system, and you know, I think we've learned a tremendous amount of lessons working through the coordinated entry system, and I think you know, one of the challenges of 14 middle was that lease up was happening during the height of COVID. And, you know, something that happened is, you know, caseworkers were no longer allowed to meet in person with folks. And so there was, you know, I think we learned a tremendous amount about the challenges of going through a lease up and working through the coordinated entry system specifically during COVID. But I think, you know, it's level of communication and, you know, constant contact and checking in. I think it's really, you know, that's really the most important piece, is that it's really about groundwork, legwork, and, you know, staying in constant contact and working through the protocols that are in place with DHS to keep things flowing.
Okay, thank you. And then there was another question from Kim about whether the projects, and you know, you heard what Chris's, you know, income limitations are for the project at Walter Reed. There's a question about the 60-40 or the 50-20 set asides. Osama, what are the income limitations of your project, and how are you operating?
Yeah, given we did not seek out or receive any HPTF or 9% allocation on our projects, so we structured it simply with 4% and private activity bonds. The restrictions on us were simply the 60% of AMI by virtue of the 4% long-housing tax credits. However, we underwrite the project to, you know, to south of 30% and expect close to 100% of our residents to be at the 30% level or lower, given the EPD waiver requirements and folks being able to qualify for it. So yeah, that's and we do expect our average age for per resident to be, you know, north of 80 at this point in time.
So I think, you know, what Kim, in response to your question, you're hearing is it does vary a lot based on sort of the other funding sources and the project. But at the end of the day, right, you know, a lot of these are very or extremely low income folks who are looking for these services, and so it does sort of shake out in that way anyway.
Correct. Yeah.
And then there's a question from Patrick as well about whether any of the affordable assisted living projects are medically licensed. And Osama, you had that very helpful sort of continuum of care diagram in your slides. Do you want to talk a little bit about the differences between an assisted living program and sort of a skilled nursing facility?
Yeah, I mean, the main difference being that, you know, the regulators in an assisted living or your main regulators are DOH and DHCF. Once you get through a certificate of occupancy with the DCRA, you do not, you know, unlike other components of the long-term care regime, so to speak, the certificate of need is not a necessary one. And your licensure is handled through the OH and or DC Health, I should say. That was the old acronym, DC Health and DHCF. So licensure-wise, you're not providing active medical services. I think that's the technical term, because again, as I think Matt, you mentioned this, that in keeping with the federal regulation for the IRS Code 42 for long-term housing tax credit program. You cannot have an institutional type of use, just as, you know, when you do mixed use projects, you have cost segregation requirements and making sure that every dollar of tax credit funds is being used strictly for the housing component, with some minor limitation where you can't expend funds on space that services the resident base. But yeah, I think the short answer to the question on licensure, there is not you don't need a certificate of need on the front end, and your DC Health licensure is a lot more straightforward than a skilled nursing facility.
Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful. And then there are two questions. One's directly directed at Chris, and then the second one is sort of related. With Chris, what is your permanent debt financing source? And then the related question is, have there been issues with, and this is a question that either Chris or Osama could answer, issues with the core perm lenders, FHA, the GSEs, Freddie and Fannie, or banks, so related to underwriting of the layering and development and operating sources needed for assisted living?
Sure. So maybe I'll start with the first one directed at me. And so our perm debt is Cedar Rapids as well.
Okay, and then I can speak from our experience, right? I mean, certainly there were lots of underwriting and sort of related questions, from our lenders, but I think the core issues in the assisted living project are less related to debt and things that FHA or the GSEs or banks would be worried about, and more sort of the interplay between tax credits and the assisted living programs. And so I think a lot of the underwriting issues, and you can tell me, Chris or Sam, if you disagree, but the investor was sort of the heavier lift in this instance than the lender.
Yeah. No, I would agree, Matt. And in terms of that product, I mean, we're, long-term bonds is the main source at this point. We are obviously constantly exploring different executions. I won't say it's equally as challenging. I mean, agency takeouts would be something wonderful, but I'm not sure that the ecosystem has matured enough where agencies have gotten, FHA, Fannie, Freddie have gotten comfortable with the new construction product. Obviously, the 220 program has some room there for multifamily and even for takeouts, but I would say it's still very nascent. So the bonds is the way to go at this point for the near future.
Yeah, and then let's see, there are a couple other questions here. One is directed at Chris.
Yeah, sure. I can take the.
Go for it.
Yeah, I can take the question from Linda. I apologize if I said that wrong. Yeah, so I mean, I think whenever you're talking about sort of a new project type in the space, equity is going to look at it. There's the newness of it. Have they underwritten it before? Do they understand the product? And then, inherently, is there additional risk there? And so I think, you can safely assume that versus a more vanilla multifamily LIHTC or, senior LIHTC project, that, there's going to be some adjustment there to take that into account. And then in terms of capital stack, I think, what you saw from kind of that, I think a slide in there is really that, we have housing production trust funds, we have the low income housing tax credit, and then, you have to get creative with the capital stack to make it work. And so I think that's really sort of the high level thought there.
Thank you. And then go ahead, Osama.
Yeah, no, I was going to layer in, and Linda, good to see you again. I mean, virtually see you. I think the short answer there is really, as Matt and Chris mentioned, the equity is going to be the main driver in the world of debt and equity funds. When that out of 100, when you get to LIHTC, I usually say you drop out 80% of the potential investors. that not only are willing, but understand the low-income housing tax credit program. Then from there, when you start talking about subcategories, whether it's, returning citizens, whether it's veteran programs, any sub-niche program as an affordable assisted living is in its nascent form, you're going to drop 80% of the remaining 20 right off the top, where folks are basically just not, there's a lot of, that's why I said in my piece that this is about building that ecosystem, both from the capital side as well as from, the regulatory and operational side, because it's not, I don't believe that anybody has yet developed a one size fits all where you can just rinse, repeat, and just say this is how to deliver the real estate or operate the real estate for that matter. I think we're going to have to throw the kitchen sink at it on every stage. And Chris said to get creative with the capital stack is just one slice.
Thank you. Perfect. And then there was a question about funding, these projects outside of the district in Virginia and other jurisdictions. And, my experience is right. These projects, the success of these projects really depends on a substantial and robust, Medicaid reimbursement rate. Is that your experience as well?
I would say that as Matt, our experience is squarely in DC. We've been doing a lot of, getting, you said you ran through Affordable Assisted Living 101. I think by the time we got to Chris, I think we were at the postgraduate year one. I think by the time you really come out of the doctoral position, you'll find that I do not believe that Medicaid is the only solution because it varies from state to state. DC is a case study of a jurisdiction that is well positioned and very progressive. And the problem, it has to do with scale. A 700,000 person population with a subsegment of that about 120,000 prospective seniors, of which about maybe 25 or 30 are really the core audience for this. Your Medicaid is a near-term solution. I think it's the gateway. But we see that potentially this whole ecosystem is going to shift to managed care programs, where you're going to have a merging of not only Medicaid but potentially Medicare, and also insurance, private insurance, that are going to be the managed care providers. So this is by no means do I purport to have the answers. All I know is if we had the answer, the problem would be solved. I don't think anybody's got the mold yet. And I don't think it's going to be a singular mold. So it's really going to be state to state, and the federal government is going to play a role. But I think it's going to have to be, on a case by case. Sorry for the wordy answer.
No, I appreciate that. I think it's definitely like, you have to be creative about putting these projects together, and certainly there are other options.
Yeah.
And then I think the last question we have is, and this could be for either of you, how do you handle the transition to skilled nursing when the tenant's health is fading and deeper levels of medical service are needed? Is there any understanding discussed with residents up front?
I'll take a crack at this. Since we're not operational, working with our operators and working with DHCF and DC Health in advance of opening and leasing up, it's going to take close collaboration with DACL, the Department of Aging and Community Living, where the case management would be handled for the majority of the seniors that will be eligible here. It's as simple as, the health plan when we admit. So every one of our residents, when they're admitted to our community, they would have a health plan developed with the care director, and this won't come as a surprise. We will have an idea. I think it was Jeff that talked about it. We do expect a turnover at around an average stay of about 12 to 16 months. So it's not, and those things they don't come as a shock, because you're screening residents through the EPD waiver. You're understanding, their level of need, and you're going to work towards trying to extend their stay as much as you can, to enable them to stay in a better place in a non-institutional setting. But inevitably, that transition will be handled in collaboration with DACL and the folks at the HCF. But it'll be a point known in time, absent a medical emergency or a change in deterioration in health conditions.
Thank you. That's helpful. Courtney, I don't know if there are any other questions from the audience. I think we've run through them. but I can turn it over to you, and I appreciate everyone participating and listening today.
Yes, thank you, everyone. I want to first thank our speakers for your expertise and lending your time today. And definitely want to thank Reno and Kavanaugh, Matt Greason and Vonda Order specifically, who have really worked hard on this program and making sure that we saw it through. And so I really appreciate your continued partnership and look forward to continuing to work with you. With that, I will adjourn the program. As I mentioned earlier, please do make sure you stop by HAND's website to register for the annual meeting and Housing Expo, as well as our upcoming program next week on DC's Building Energy Performance Standards. And we look forward to seeing everyone soon. Thank you.
Thank you.